Liberia has some of the richest forest lands in Western Africa, but also has a troubled economic and political history. When Ellen Sirleaf Johnson took office as Africa's first female president 13 years ago, one of her goals was to capitalize on the country's precious forests that had been safeguarded for centuries by the indigenous people in the remote Sino County region of Liberia.
For indigenous people, a forest is more than just the physical land or the physical trees. It's their way of life. It is their supermarket, it's their hospital. It is everything to them.
Alfred Brownell, an attorney and law professor, together with his Green Advocates organization, agreed to mitigate the conflict between the native people and Golden Beryllium, an international palm oil conglomerate. The company had forcefully established palm oil plantations by clearing indigenous peoples' lands without notice, consent, or compensation. In the process, the company had polluted local water sources, cleared community forests, and destroyed the tribe's sacred sites.
Alfred Brownell was and boy,
If you stood in the village, you just see the massive oil palm. I was shocked. Centuries of history and culture. The company replaced that with an oil palm operation. They were harassing them. They were intimidating them. They were arresting them. Women were arrested, they were beaten, they were stripped naked, and were thrown in the back of police van taken to prison. People were so afraid they couldn't even raise their voice to ask questions about what was going on. So the first one was to give them hope, to encourage them, to make them to believe that they had rights and they could stand up and they could fight for their forest.
Alfred and his team filed a complaint with the Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil and documented the numerous ways in which Golden Beryllium was violating the standards that had been established for sustainable certification. But Alfred was soon faced with a confrontation for which his law studies could never have prepared him. A blockade in the middle of a palm oil plantation was a setting for a hostile band of Golden Beryllium employees with machetes, threatening Alfred with brutally ending his life. Then the village chief intervened with the attackers.
He said, this blood that you want to waste, you can put this blood on this land. So you have to take him to another town and kill him. I told the driver, let's go. And we fled the area.
Alfred's bravery and determination resulted in the Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil issuing a stop work order on Golden Beryllium because of the numerous violations that Green Advocates had listed in their complaint filing. Chief among those violations was that Golden Beryllium had not received the consent of the indigenous people to turn their forests into palm oil plantations.
So Alfred Brownell, when I return to Codina, can better, you don't take equal rumbo.
When I got the news that the arrests were being restored now to protect this forest and protect the people who live in this forest for generations to come, I was overwhelmed and I cried.
After the decision in favor of the native people, Alfred's safety and security were jeopardized, even in his home in Monrovia. A warrant for his arrest was issued that quickly turned into a manhunt that he barely escaped with his wife and children.
It was the toughest decision that Alfred ever made. And I can tell you, even when Alfred succeeded, even in leaving the country, Alfred's goal was to instantly come back. So, Alfred left with a very heavy heart.
Alfred and his family are living in exile in the United States. He's a visiting environmental and human rights law professor at Northeastern University in Boston. He publicly speaks out at schools, churches, and community groups to focus attention on protecting Liberian forests from being exploited further by encroaching industries.
I had to pull my family off. I had to tear my children away. Whenever I talk to the indigenous people who I work with, I really miss them. I have made up my mind that even with the gun at my face, I will do this a million times. I am not afraid. I am prepared and I have no regret.
Hello.
Welcome, Alfred. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You certainly saw the video. Basically, this was an attempt by indigenous people, local communities, and activists to try to stop two of the world's largest oil palm plantations from destroying what I consider, the largest block of forest in West Africa. Which is one of the world's biodiversity hotspot, the largest carbon sink in the region, and the green fortress that is trying to protect the region for the encroaching Sahara Desert. And also the home of indigenous people who for centuries and decades have considered this place, has, their religion, their culture, their supermarket, and you can, talk the rest of that. But before I proceed, I also would like to give a context about Liberia, and I'm going to speak a little bit much faster because I came on late so we can beat the time. Liberia was set up by free slaves from the US in the 1800s. And there was a mission to civilize and Christianize the indigenous people on the continent. And of course, that mission really did not pursue the way they wanted to because sadly and ironically, the free slaves became themselves slave masters. And that resulted into a series of problems, the way they ruled. So there was a military coup in 1980 led by Aboriginal people, and then the civil war that came through the 90s. Most of you followed the Liberian Civil War and found what the implications were. Several years later, the war was over, we had an election. We have seen two of the best sons and daughters of the country emerging as leaders. First, the first female president of Africa, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who became a Nobel laureate, and then currently now we have a soccer icon. He is the only Black person to have attained the best footballer of the year. And so he's now currently president of Liberia. But with the coming of these two leaders, there's also was the issue of trying to lift the nation out of its war and improve its economy and living standard of the people. And the way that they felt they would have done that was to be able to attract foreign direct investment to the country. And of course, the foreign direct investment that was coming to Liberia posed a serious threat to what we call the lungs of West and North Africa, this largest block of forest that is in the region. And just to have an idea what I'm talking about, to figure out how significant this forest is, I'll show you the map of Africa. If you look at this map, you'll see there are only two major green areas across the continent. You can see that in the northwestern corner of the region, you see that's green, is West Africa. And then in the middle, you see Central Africa. And then going further down to the south, you see Madagascar. But if I even zoom much further more, this is what West Africa looks like. If you look at West Africa, you see certainly that the greenest part of West Africa is in Liberia. And so you could see that there was this need for the forest and for the resources that contain this forest. But the issue of attracting investment to Liberia is also an issue that have also plagued Africa. Most of you know the history of the scramble for Africa in the 1600s and 1700s, led by the Belgian King Leopold, and how the entire continent was colonized. After the whole drive for independence, a new scramble began on the continent. This time the scramble was trying to attract resources across the country. Trillions of dollars of investment attracting oil, gas, mining, agriculture were pouring across the continent. But of course, the benefits were only the foreign corporations and the elites who ran those places. And to see how that really affected Liberia, I'll show you the next slide. If there was a scramble for resources in Africa, you can definitely see how that scramble impacted Liberia. And you can see all of the actors, Exxon, Chevron, Gordon Vermeulen, Bridgestone Firestone. I mean, in about 12 years, $20 billion in foreign direct investment, more than 75% of the surface area of the country impacted by these investments. Of course, there will be implications. Imagine a country emerging out of civil war, the destruction of its social, political, economic institution, and all of a sudden, there's this shock with massive investment flowing across, threatening not just its resources and its people, but the largest carbon sink in the region. And a newspaper in the UK even described that the country was all for sale. It was like almost funny. And of course, this was not just in that period of the conflict. The issue of scrambling for Liberia resources started even before the Civil War. As far back as 1926 with the US company Bridgestone Firestone trying to have access to rubber that is used to fuel the need for equipment for World War II by the US. And of course, has Bridgestone made its billions and expanded in its upstream and downstream activities, Liberia descended more into poverty, and its waste from its industrial processes impacted poor communities. And the children were beasts of burden who were being used to move the rubber further. And not only were Bridgestone involved, there were also mining companies were involved in that country. Poor farmers who could not afford employment, fields were being flooded by settlements for mining operations while the company was trucking iron ore. There were promises to generate electricity using the fields and farms of poor farmers. Those were not done. Unfortunately, the wool were chipped and it was shipped to Europe to subsidize European energy needs while Liberians were suffering. Timber companies that came in provided ridiculous housing conditions, for workers who were involved in them as they exploited the timber of the country. And then, of course, what this fly is about is the recent struggle of trying to protect that forest. If you saw that very intact forest, this is exactly what started happening beginning 2010, as the country gave millions of acres of forest land to two of the largest oil palm companies. And it was not just the land that was being grabbed and given. If you see this map, you can see a border of a concession. And in this map, you can see how towns and villages were also captured within the concession area, so that the government was not just giving rights to land and natural resources, but rights of indigenous people who live in this area. Their homes were being taken away from them. Even though, the tribes will tell you that they knew their land, they had a system of land use put into place, how they carry on their farm, a system where their entrepreneurial and livelihood activities coexisted with nature. They knew that. But this was not the kind of entrepreneurship that the government of Liberia was interested in. They were not interested in the bottom-up development where they could work with indigenous people who have developed the model for how do you survive and extract from nature and still live with nature. They wanted a system that will completely replace that. So we saw massive deforestation across the landscape. In one community, they referred to the company as the Bible, that came and barb and clean away and shave away out of the forest. Even local entrepreneurship were not being fairly treated. This slide, I will talk a little bit about that. How, for example, who were growing oranges and they destroy their orange orchard, have to pay them, receive less compensation. Towns and villages, were completely forcefully evicted. Waters were polluted. And people who were once entrepreneurs, responsible people in the town and villages, became slave laborers. These are women who struggling to go to work. And people homes, the companies finally imposed no trespass zone within the territories of the indigenous people. And not even their burial grounds were being spared. They were all captured by the oil palm. And so we had to act. We had to act. We had to mobilize. We had to build a resistance. We had to stop this plague that was attacking not just this forest, but the homes of people, their culture, their religion, and everything. So Green Africa, my organization, went into action, providing training to communities. And that led to resistance. And we decided that we needed to pursue legal action. So we built a resistance from on the ground and mobilized the communities, but we needed to figure out how to do a tough process by bringing legal action to stop this. We had to the choices whether to pursue with domestic code, pursue this case through a regional code, or handle it through a trade-related grievance process. And we choose the trade-related process because we felt that these two companies had put themselves up as sustainable organizations and were trying to market certified products. So we went after that because we knew that the certification was an important asset needed to attract financing, to attract supplies, and to attract investment. So we went after that. And that trade body was the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil that had put in place principles and criteria that its members should follow. And so we discovered in our investigation that these two companies had not followed this system. So we filed a complaint. And among the many criteria was zero net deforestation and obtain the free, prior, informed consent of communities. So we filed a complaint, and immediately the Roundtable responded and knew that the company was eligible, stopped the company from operating, and asked it to commence immediate negotiation with the local communities. It was at that point that the government got an interest. All of this time, over a period of 3-4 years, as we organized, we created awareness and drew the attention of the government to what's happened to these people into the forest. There were no interest. When we finally got a decision from the Roundtable to put a stop order on the company, the government started taking interest. The president herself visited a community, and I was directly threatened. And I was like, man, President, I'm just the only messenger in here. And then they decided to stop the negotiation. They didn't want the company to talk to the indigenous people because they had characterized that as being undermining the sovereignty of the republic. So there were protest action. And then they deployed the police. And there were massive arrests, intimidation, harassment. Towns fled to the villages, almost trying to ghost towns. And I, like I said, you saw the video, I came under attack. I was forced to flee Liberia to travel abroad, and of course, while I was in exile, they launched a media campaign of stigmatization against me. But this struggle that all of us pursue, it is not just for us. It's not just for the indigenous people. It is for the survival of the planet. When corporations and individuals and governments set aside their plans and programs to destroy nature, we have to find a way to respond because we have to be those soldiers to help to ensure the survival of everyone. So while in exile, I did not stop. I continued my attack. I continued to pursue the case. And we got a decision in 2017 to stop these companies. And they were not able to operate. In fact, they complained that they had the money and there was no land because now we had very firm resistance on the ground, and we had a decision from the Roundtable that they could not proceed with this action. Then the company appealed our decision, and in July of 2018, the appeal was denied. The other company, Sam Dabi, we continued pursuing it, and they were forced to be able to divest some out of Liberia. And so more than 6 million acres of forest land became temporarily protected because of our actions. But what I want to say, the problem we faced in Liberia was not just mutually exclusive of what's happening across the world. There were institutions that are responsible for driving this deforestation, for driving the desecration and destruction and obliteration of the homes of indigenous people. And they include food companies, beverages, brands, asset managers, equity, pension funds, and others who are involved in these things. So it's good to see those connections. But it's not just that they are driving these things, but there are also implications for deforestation in the remote areas in Liberia. One will argue that, well, you know, it's in Liberia, there's no connection. But we'll see how deforestation is linked to climate change. And we'll see how the IPCC have linked all of that. And we'll see how the implication in terms of migration, we're seeing climate change implication. And not just climate change implication, we'll see how people are also implicating migration trends. Because when you destroy land and people are facing drought and food insecurity and poverty and violence, they move. And they move, but not only migration, we're also seeing now, you know, for this presentation, we're not able to meet. We have to meet virtually. It's not clear that destroying the forest has implications for public health. And so in Liberia, for example, in 2014 in West Africa, most of you are aware of the Ebola outbreak. There are scientists who have traced that outbreak and linked it to deforestation. And we now face what we now all of us are currently going through with COVID-19. And there's more evidence pointing that this is just the tip of the iceberg, that the more and more we are human are involved in fragmenting habitat and forest ecosystem, this is going to implicate public health processes. And so what should we do? Most of what everyone has talked about, especially in terms of, you know, people from very powerful nations, like we have to separate people, we have to shut down borders, we have to build walls. But that is not the implications, because all of us are in this boat together. It is very clear from what we've seen from climate implications across the globe that it starts in a remote area, you destroy the forest, but we face the migration, we face the drought, we face the food insecurity, we face the global public health epidemic. We are in this boat together. Building a wall is not sufficient. All of us have responsibility to address this, because there is going to be costs. Can anyone put a price tag on what has caused us to respond to the current global pandemic? We've seen government putting up millions of dollars in stimulus packages, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. What's about the human costs? What's about other costs to do all of that? So we have to act, and the time to act is now. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Alfred. Alfred, there are many questions in the chat box. Do you know how to access that?
Let me see.
Hover your mouse over the bottom of the screen, and there's a little white box that'll pop up right in the middle. It says chat.
Yes, I've seen it. I've seen it. Okay, I just got there. Okay. So I'm trying to see what the questions are. Sorry, I'm a little bit a tech peasant. I'm trying to navigate how to move the chat. It's a small screen. I don't know how to enlarge it.
So one question is from Charlie.
Okay.
It says, yes, palm oil is used in so many products. Is there a viable alternative?
What is there's an alternative?
Yeah, he's asking if there's a viable alternative to palm oil.
Well, you know, I will speak about myself. I grew up using palm oil. That is an indigenous product in West Africa. My mom, you know, we cook it in our food, and that's, you know, we still do that. I think the real problem with palm oil is the whole question of how, I mean, it's how unsustainable it was, how it became this massive commercial industrialized product based on a demand for us as humans. You know, it's not just, you know, sometimes it's good to blame these companies, yes, but the companies are only responding to the demand from us as human beings. So we demand, we want cheap food, we want cheap cosmetic, we want biofuel, all of these things that we feel could be very cheap. And the palm oil provided that. So I think the alternative here is to make sure that we can grow it in a very sustainable way. There's been some question about synthetic palm oil. Some of the work done by, I think, what is his name, Bill Gates, trying to pioneer this, and some universities are exploring that. But I'm reminded by another product, and I'm from Liberia, where also we grew rubber. I'll talk about the Bridgestone Firestone. So there was this question, and there was a need for synthetic rubber. Now we are plagued with plastic all across the world. So if we pursue this synthetic palm oil, we'll be creating another problem. I don't know, but I think what we should do is go back to the communities and the indigenous people who have grew this product and have allowed it, like I said, to coexist with nature. When I grew up in my village in Liberia, we have palm oil. It grew up in the forest. The tribes would go into the forest and harvest palm product like they harvest any other wild products. It grew there. So there was a possibility to do that. But the commercial process has refused to learn from indigenous people, learn from their entrepreneurship, learn from their innovation. And I think this is what we need to explore more. How can we do that so that the process can coexist? So this, I think, is the most viable option. What's your other question? Do we change the economic paradigm to, yes, I think for me, we need to evolve. The problem actually is the model. Is this large-scale plantation, industrial operations that come clear-cut the forest, how far as the eye can see across the horizon, where they create, you saw the video, a desert of oil palm, exterminating everything. We have to think about another model where communities who have existed and pioneered this thing, we can now go and work with them to shape this model. We need that process to do that. But there's very little investment in community-driven entrepreneurship. If anything, people believe that indigenous people and local communities are savages and primitive people, and they need, to be supported, and we need to help them, and we feel they are miserable. No one is trying to see the innovations that are across these communities. The forest we talk about was not protected because the government of Liberia put into place policies. That forest was protected because of the way how communities' cultural and traditional practices save it. You saw the slides about the old man. They had a land use system. They knew where to go put their farms. They knew where to go harvest. They knew where the forest was sacred, that no one would go there. It was a complete taboo to go in certain part of that forest. So they protected and preserved it, and it still survived. What we need is building upon that model and working with them to innovate it. The thing about whether sustainable harvested palm oil threatening communities, there's a whole question of how do you monitor, verify that process? How do you ensure? There's a whole concept of, okay, there's third-party monitoring, evaluation, and assessment. I mean, what has happened in a lot of these third-party schemes is that they are not independent, they are not transparent, and they are not accountable. So, for example, the RSPO that we're involved with has that built into it. The Forest Stewardship Council has that built into it. But who's going to verify what happened in very remote communities if it's not involving civil society? So we got to go back and rethink that model of third-party verification and build into it first a process that local communities and local CSO themselves are in power to do that monitoring, reinforced by peer review processes. But just relying on third party where the consultant is hired and he goes in the country and he sits there and talks to a few people and he reports, especially where the consultants who involved in this third party process have been hired by the companies. Of course, he will pace the purpose, call the tune. Well, there's been a lot of reports, and I can refer to how these endowment funds, the Vanguard and others are implicated. There's a Friends of the Earth report that certainly linked that process to what this is doing. So there's been a lot of NGO reports, Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace. They've all have done extensive reports, Rainforest Action Network, that link these endowment funds, these pension funds, and these banks to how they've been financing and investing in oil palm across the globe. So there's a lot of literature that cover that process. I can certainly share that link so you can see the reports. Of course, yes, you can post the video on Facebook.
Alfred, could you read the questions so we know which question you're answering?
So they say, can you tell us how Vanguard is implicated and what we can do about it? I think we should start, like I said, there's reports linking them in terms of how they invested into major oil palm corporations, not just in Liberia, but across the globe. And I think if we need to organize, a shareholder stuff, those who are investing into it, you need to call and figure out how your money is being treated, ask questions. And I think we need to write letters to follow those up. Oh, of course. Where did the money go that they put into the country? First and foremost, the deal was just backdoor deals done by the companies and the government of Liberia. There was very little transparency in that whole process, this is what happened. The companies came in, they negotiated a deal, they didn't consult the communities, and it was in Monrovia. People live in villages, and the government said, oh, go into this village. In Liberia, it's divided into administrative structures. And the structures are called counties, like in the US, you call state, but it's a unitary process. So they say, oh, go in 5 counties. So in Sandabi, go to Cape Mount, go to Bombing, go to Lofa, and take us 220,000 hectares of farmland and put in oil palm. Go to the Southeast, go to Sino, go to Riverside, go to Grand Jude, go to Maryland, and plant 330,000 hectares of oil palm. People who own this land were never consulted. It was just done by the elites in the government. And of course, it's difficult to figure out where the money went. And Liberia is really with a lot of corruption. This is exactly what I will talk about the model of investment is. If you have a model that's only linked to the elites in the government, and now it linked to those who own the land, those who have a stake in the land, those who for centuries have preserved and conserved that land and developed the models, of livelihood activities that have coexisted with nature, this is what you get. I believe if there was serious attention to go in and sit down and listen and investigate how people have survived and how we can build on those models, we'll be having the sort of problem we are not having now. Mr. Water question, such a powerful weaving together of history, political. Do you see overlap of issues and action? Of course. The real drivers of these things come from the US. When we were in exile, and the first day I took my kids out to go shopping, and we went out, to a grocery store, they were shocked. We saw alleys of cereals, alleys of stuff, the scales of commercialism, and we knew exactly how this would be driven. If you walk into a grocery store and just look on the shelf, just figure out where these ingredients come from. And some of these ingredients are hidden. How will you know, for example, that the nail polish you use has palm oil, that the lipstick you use has palm oil, that the soap you use has palm oil, that the ice cream you eat has palm oil, that the fast food you go to has palm oil? These are like completely hidden beneath this brand and beneath the labels. And it is left with us as consumers to begin to ask these questions and pay attention. Because why? All of us are implicated. Because it's not just, like I said, the impact on droughts and floods and hurricanes and migration and climate change. It's also the global public health implications that all of us are involved with. So it behooves all of us to do it. That's why I said we are in this boat together. Of course, yes, that's a fact. It sounds like Liberia has some very basic problems of governance, rule of law. Yes, that's a fact. There's no way to accuse Liberia of that. That's a fact. But it's escalated by how this investment has now compounded that. What has happened has the person is pointing on with weak governance and rule of law. You have weak governance. And so when you have massive foreign direct investment of corporations whose annual assets is in billions of dollars as compared to the government of Liberia, whose annual budget is $500 million. You have a situation what we call of corporate capture. So you have corporations that are so powerful, they themselves become a state within a state. And they detect how things will occur because they are very powerful. How can you compare Bristol Firestone to the government of Liberia? How can you compare Sam Dabi that has this massive global outreach to the government of Liberia? There's no way they can even negotiate on equivalence.
So Alfred, This is wonderful, and I hate to be the one who interrupts, but I think we need to move on to the workshops where people who want to talk with you further will join.